of a religion. Oftentimes we think about all the bad stuff that's involved in a religion or in an organized group of people or in an institution. Centralized power and the, is that door closed? The potential for abuse. Gifted authority instead of earned authority. Oftentimes we focus on the bad things that are involved in group dynamics or in an institution or an organization or in an organized religion. And there's a bunch of them. Those potential problems also exist in any organization. So, the MBA, for example, or the medical profession, or the teaching profession, or colleges, or a yoga studio, or a small business for the employees of that business. Anytime you have a group of people, then naturally you're going to have a hierarchy, because just human beings, being social mammals, end up organizing themselves. If not by design, then just naturally. If not that you've designed a corporate structure, then naturally the design of your biology will result in there being a hierarchy. There'll be an alpha, and there'll be betas and omegas, and there'll be people playing different roles in a group dynamic. It happens automatically anytime a group of people form. You see it in hockey teams. You see it in book clubs. You see it when you take a group of people that don't work together in a corporate exercise and you give them a bicycle to put together or a task to accomplish, or in the military. And just automatically, people start to organize. Somebody takes the lead role. Or people compete sometimes for the lead role. Like chimpanzees will compete for dominance in a group. I just watched Jane Goodall today analyzing Donald Trump's body language. And she said his body language almost exactly mirrored that of a chimp vying for dominance in the jungle. And it was bizarre, because normally politicians make, they move their arms and speak in an impassioned way. But Donald Trump's personal body language in this mashup, whatever they call that. What do they call that when you put a bunch of, what's the thing called when you put a bunch of clips together? Montage, sure. Compilation, yes. A mashup also. But there's a name for it usually when you look at a video that's that. They don't usually use that formal language, which is for any collection of things, but specifically a collection of clips. Yeah, maybe a supercut, right? Yeah, right? Yeah. And so I think that's what it might have been called. So his body language, it was dramatic. He looked like a chimp. He went like this, and it was bizarre. And Jane Goodall, the famous English primatologist, she just thought it was hilarious. Of course, she's not from the U.S., so it doesn't really matter, what we're doing over here across the pond. They can laugh at us. But yeah, so there's a sense in which, because we are social mammals, and then these standard dynamics apply. So you can create a hierarchy, like in a business structure, where you have an employer and employees and managers and mid-level managers and C-level positions and all that kind of stuff. Or you can just get a group of people together and give them any task, and automatically they'll self-organize because it's in our DNA, it's in our biology as a survival mechanism for us to do so. So anytime a group of people get together to cook in the kitchen or to clean, you'll see hierarchies emerge out of necessity without any artificial imposition whatsoever. Then sometimes people will engineer hierarchies, which, by the way, hierarchy means sacred order. And that whole idea of hierarchies as one way to view phenomena, this is going to get slightly, up until right now, I think what I've been saying, any junior high school kid who's paying attention should be able to follow. I'm now going to speak on a level that you are going to need to be probably at an undergraduate level of intelligence and ability to focus to be able to follow. So I'll go back to the low-level stuff I normally do momentarily. We'll go back to our regular scheduled programming, but for right now, if you guys could all put on your smart caps, that would be great. There's two basic ways to view reality. One is that reality has a design or a purpose behind it. If reality has a design or purpose behind it, macrocosmically, it means there's a God because there's a designer. The other way to view reality is that the design was built into it by things like survival mechanisms that don't require a deity. But when you start to look at a telos or a purpose, and you look at teleological arguments for inherent design, then those arguments for inherent design lead you pretty quickly, philosophically, to a designer. Alternatively, if you take the other possibility, which is that there's something like a survival mechanism that's just natural, it seems like a default reasonable survival mechanism. If life arose by chance, if there was a Big Bang by chance, that's a singularity. If life arose by chance, that's abiogenesis. And if there were random genetic mutations, and the ones that helped organisms better survive last, and the ones that didn't got done away with, that's natural selection. We then evolve into human beings, and the mapping and the instinct and the automatic organizing into groups is merely created by a survival impulse mixed with random genetic mutation. Do you guys follow that? And then we engineer other hierarchies, but they in some ways represent the original hierarchy, which was random genetic mutation coupled with survivability, coupled with a natural impulse to lean towards survivability. Do you guys follow that? There's the Panchaklesh in the sadhana pada of the Yoga Sutras. And it speaks about clinging to life, abhinivesh, rag, dvesh, avidya. God, there's 5 of them. There's attachment, aversion. These are basic instinctual features of life. Human beings specifically in the Yoga Sutras, but I think it pertains to all life. Attachment, aversion, ignorance. Ignorance is the granddaddy of them all that leads to the mother bad quality that leads to all these things. And then there's abhinivesh, which means clinging to life. And I'm forgetting what number 4 is, what number 5 is. asmita, a sense of I-ness, a sense of ego. Attachment, aversion, a sense of ego, clinging to life, and then finally avidya, the parent of all of it, which is an ignorance of your natural connection to divinity and your inclination to identify with this world. But that clinging to life is even noted by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. That survival impulse, which would then lead you to try to survive, and then those qualities that helped you to survive, then those qualities would naturally last because they would increase survivability, and then voila, we evolve through random genetic mutation and natural selection into being the complicated beings we are now, with our love of hierarchies, which increase your chance of survival like they do with all social mammals. Do you follow this? There's another way to get to that same principle. It's called scala naturi. That there's a natural order. Scala, scale. There's a natural order. Naturi, a natural order to life. And this goes back forever. It's there in the Gita. When Krishna says, amongst mountains, amongst immovable things, I'm the Himalayas. Amongst aquatics, I'm the shark. Amongst luminous objects, I'm the sun. He's identifying himself as the superlative exemplar in 70 different phenomena, so that when you look at the world and you see something which is particularly powerful, I'm death, which takes everything away. Amongst all the ways you can take something away, I'm death, which is the ultimate taker-awayer. I'm also the beginning, middle, and end of all things, the Alpha and the Omega. Whenever you see something which is particularly powerful, that's a spark of my splendor. Krishna's attempting to help you look at the world and see a natural order, or rather, see the natural order is already there. Amongst fish, who's an apex predator. Right. I wasn't asking a question. That's okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Thank you. I sound like a question. But when you look at any group, then you'll have an apex predator in that group. They have no natural predators. No one hunts them. Like Komodo dragons never get hunted. Where they live in Indonesia, they are the apex predator. They eat everything else. And they have poison, by the way, which I didn't know. I just read that recently. Do you guys know what Komodo dragons are? There's these huge monitor lizards, like these massive, gymongous lizards that are, as big as a human being, but a lizard. and they eat everything else. They're the apex predators. Anyway, they have poison too, which is crazy. So when you look, at any life forms, or when you look at Aristotle, or you look at ancient Greek philosophy, when you look at anything in the world, like amongst metals, there's base metals. An example of a base metal is lead. Then there's noble metals. The classic example of a noble metal is Mason, Mudden, gold. Good guess. And it was a guess. I saw the vexed look on your face as you just threw something out there. And in alchemy, in any tradition, the word alchemy is from Arabic. Anytime you see al in front of something, algebra, alchemy, it's all means it's Arabic. Algorithm. But when you look at alchemy, in any alchemical tradition, whether it's the Rasa Siddha traditions of India, which are alchemical, or Chinese traditional medicine, which is also strongly alchemical, or Western alchemical, hermetic traditions, you find that the big pursuit is to take a base metal like lead and turn it into gold. In India, the way you're supposed to do that is you suck mercury up through your urethra, which is the thing that you pee out of in your penis, and then you mix that by sucking it up through your urethra with your own ojas or power, and then you pee on lead, and then that lead becomes gold. By the way, this is where modern day yoga comes from. Hatha yoga with all of its mudras and bandhas and pranayam. This is all straight Indian alchemy. It all came out of the Hatha yoga tradition. In fact, if you read traditional texts on Hatha yoga, they have all sorts of weird alchemical experiments that you can do that involve various bodily fluids. And the whole Tantra tradition also came from the same basic source. The whole tantric sexual Tantra is not all about sex, but the whole Tantric tradition, along with the sexual varieties, also all came from the same root source, this alchemical inclination to try to manipulate the world. This is behind the fountain of youth, searches for the fountain of youth, the universal solvent, which is supposed to be able to dissolve anything. And then, like I said, the transformation of base metals into noble metals. So even amongst trees, even fruit-bearing trees are noble trees. Thorn trees would be base trees. And so the Scala Naturae was an attempt to look at the entire world and see a grand cosmic hierarchy, because it all came from a creator. When you looked at the world, you would see that certain things exemplify the essence of a phenomenon, of an item. Immovable objects, the greatest immovable objects, the Himalayas, which are actually a young mountain range. According to whatever the science is that deals with such things. What's the science that deals with? Geology, thank you. I wanted to say geography, and I knew I was wrong, so I was hesitating. Which is the graphing of the planet, as opposed to geo means planet, Earth, and then logos, the logic of the earth, the study of the earth, geology, as opposed to the graphing of the earth. According to geology, the Himalayas are quite a young mountain range. And it appears that the Ganga River actually predates the Himalayas. By the way the mountains came up around the Ganga, it appears the Ganga existed prior to the Himalayas, and it just continued to work its way down as the mountains came up. Then the Ganga's course was altered, but it still managed to run its way. So this whole Scala Naturae was an attempt by philosophers, and we find it in the Gita, and we also find it in Shakespeare, and we also find it in Aristotle. We find it everywhere. That when you look at the world, you naturally see an order, because the order was built into the world from its very beginning. And therefore you see elements of that order everywhere. And it wasn't an evolution out of nothing based on a simple survival mechanism. Rather, the world was designed with hierarchies inherent within it, and therefore when human beings get together, they naturally form groups, because we were built to do that by our Creator. Did you see that? Did you follow that or not? You spacing out? Are you spacing out? Don't. I asked you not to space out. Are you guys following this? I told you it's not going to be easy. Did you guys all follow it? Raise your hand if you followed that. That's not very... don't not raise your hand because you're lame and want to rebel against me and show me how cool you are, because it just makes me think you're lame, super lame. If you follow what I said, please raise your hand so I know what I'm dealing with. Let me try again. Please pay attention. One way of getting to hierarchies is that you had a few basic things. You had a survival instinct, and you had natural selection, which means that things that increase your survivability last and things which don't die out from random genetic mutations. Therefore, we evolved through random genetic mutation because there is no ultimate purpose to the world. And we developed hierarchies because they increase survivability. And that's why human beings, when you ask them to build a bicycle or clean a temple or cook, will naturally form hierarchies. Did you all follow that? Okay. Option 2. This is the one that requires you to pay attention. Option 2 is that there is a grand designer. And that design was built into the universe from the very beginning. And when you look at anything, you can understand that thing by looking for those qualities which are most wonderful or representative of a given category of item. For instance, amongst mountains, it would be the immovability or the grandness or the highness of them. Amongst aquatics, it would be an apex predator of the sea. Amongst trees, it would be the ability to offer something amazingly beneficial to other forms of life, namely fruit or nuts. And you look at the world and you find that there is a natural order that all animals have certain things in common, but then some of those animals best exemplify those items and they become apex predators. They weren't built out of nothing. Rather, they were designed like that. There is a natural order to the entire creation. There's a telos. There's a purpose behind everything. Therefore, when you look at the world, you find order. Not because we evolved to that, but because it was like that from the beginning, because there was an ultimate designer. And that's why when you start to believe that there's purpose everywhere, you quickly get to theism. Because there's a person who designed that purpose. There's an intelligence that designed that purpose from the beginning, as opposed to it coming about by random genetic mutation. We evolve from the top down, not from the bottom up. It's two totally distinct ways of looking at the world, and they both work. Did you follow it that time? You see this in the Gita. You see it in Aristotle. You see it in alchemy, in Hatha Yoga, in all the old world philosophies. This idea of purpose is front and center. And it gave rise to this whole phenomenon called Scala Naturae, which you find in Shakespeare. In Shakespeare, in Othello, King Lear. I might be mixing two plays. Iago, I think, was the antagonist in Othello. And he says, I don't believe in a god of kings. I believe in a god of knaves, or a god of fools, or a god of peasants. And so what was being challenged there was, I don't believe in any purpose. I don't believe in any design. I don't believe in a god of kings. What was happening there was the Age of Enlightenment was just about to occur in the early 1600s. It was just happening. The Renaissance was just in full effect, really. It wasn't just starting to happen. It was in full effect. And people were starting to, because what happened was when you start talking about the natural order of things, then amongst human beings, who's at the apex? Kings and priests. So then they have more power. And then they try to hold on to their power. And then they create caste systems so that peasants, serfs, and mercantile people are relegated to a lower level. And there's no upward mobility because they rule by divine right. They were designed like that. The king was designed to be God's representative in human society. Actually, the king is called, and sometimes in Sanskrit, Naradev, God amongst men. So not only was it this idea philosophically of divine right, but it actually worked its way into the very term used for king. I'm sure we could find something in English too. You know, the almighty, supreme, sovereign, Lord of all creatures, divinely empowered, you know, God's chosen one, blah, 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 blah. So you'll find the same kind of language used in the epithets and the honorifics, even in English for kings. And then people get upset because now there's no upward mobility and it becomes an oppressive system designed to keep certain people and things down, and you see this rebellion. But even you take communism and you still end up with an aristocracy, namely the people who are in the government, who hold all the power. It's not like in communism they all just got together and took a collective decision. I mean, that's democracy. But it's not like in communism everybody just agreed and what was in the best interest of the state. There were still people making those decisions on behalf of everybody else, and they had nicer stuff and they controlled everybody. And that's why when the USSR broke down, what was the government ruling everybody and really like having a really totalitarian regime where they actually enjoyed way more power than they would have in a democracy. They could get away with pesky stuff like elections and all that kind of stuff that messes things up. And you just keep having these junta after junta, and you get in charge of the military, and you can justify killing people. Putin's famous for killing people in exotic ways with bizarre poisons and such. It just gets away with stuff like that because he's from a totalitarian regime. But when communism broke down, it gave rise to rule by the oligarchs. Because all those people who were in big government positions, they controlled everything, and then they controlled all the wealth. And then when you got away with that totalitarian regime of communism, then you just got this, ruling class, and you still had the same privilege. And so all the former KGBs, I mean, Putin himself was a former KGB member, but all the former people who were high up in the government, they became fabulously wealthy, and they still retain their positions as, practically speaking, untouchable. So this happens automatically. People group up and they organize, and there's no way to even get rid of it. So even when you talk about, we don't want to have these oppressive systems, which I think is a great thing, then you're going to end up replacing it with some other system. You're never going to not have a hierarchy. You may have the free grouping of people, fair enough, but the free grouping of people sometimes can be way uglier than when people sit down and write something like a constitution. If you look at state laws, laws against murder and rape and stuff like that. If you look at state laws, most state laws, they're not written from scratch. There was a group of lawyers that got together, and over a period of a decade, they wrote a sample of state laws for any state in the U.S. to use. And it took hundreds of lawyers, a dozen years, to come up with a solid set of basic state laws that could act as a template, almost like a template for writing a letter or a business plan, and then you can fill in some bells and whistles for the state of California or Arizona or whatever. Most states use that because otherwise they got to reinvent the wheel, and that's a pain. The Constitution with its amendments, that was thousands of years in the making. Those guys all read Plato, and from Plato all the way up to John Locke. They were well read in the literature of the entire world about governing and organization. And you see really deeply philosophical thoughts about social contract theory and natural rights. Stuff that you guys don't even know about. unless you go and make a formal study of it. And so why would we leave it to everybody to figure that stuff out about stuff like rape and murder? That seems preposterous. And so a straight anarchical society where it's a free grouping of men, that becomes problematic. At some point, you don't want to just break it all down to that over and over and over again and have warring tribes all across the U.S. armed to the teeth with 300 million small arms. You guys following this? That sounds awful. You get a little sample of what the free grouping of men looks like in prison. And it's might equals right. The only reason why we're able to have sophisticated documents like the Constitution is because what went right along with it was a well-organized militia. You want to say women and children and the old people should have equal rights? You have to have a group of armed, usually men, ensuring those rights continue to exist. You have this great idea. We want to have equal rights for everybody. And the way you make sure that happens is you come up with really good laws that are carefully put together by really smart people, building on the work of their predecessors, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Like what our state governments do when they borrow from this template, like what they did when they wrote the Constitution. And then, like the Supreme Court has to do when they weigh in on the constitutionality of something. And then you have to have the best armed people in town wandering around the streets, making sure that equal rights exist, by capturing and punishing people who don't follow the rules. You break it down to anarchy, it's not just every man for himself, which is even worse. It's the grouping of people, and then, you got demagogues and people who pander to audiences and impassioned speakers and orators and articulate people and people with a vision. They're always going to be at the top. Because they're smarter and more charismatic than all of us. There's always going to be some alpha in some form. Either that's by divine design, or it's by natural selection. Interestingly, you can still believe in a God, a deistic God, that allows the world to be created by evolution, or that encodes survival principles into reality. And so even the belief in evolution and random genetic mutation doesn't mandate against the existence of God. It becomes a little bit more of a ghost in the machine, a little bit more of an unnecessary appendage to your philosophy. But if you can come up with other good reasons to believe in God, such as because consciousness exists and is an irreducible feature of reality that should not have arisen by natural selection, or that life could not have arisen by natural selection, if you can find areas of reality that exist which can't be accounted for by natural selection, and then the theory of God is a better theory, you can still hold on to the belief in a deity alongside a belief in natural selection. You guys following all this? I doubt it, but I think some of you are following and maybe a lot of you are partially following. I'll say that last bit again. I'm positing these two things as being two different possibilities. Atheism and things just evolved by random chance, and then theism and it was a top-down design and God designed the world like this. It's not quite that simple, because you could believe that things evolved naturally through natural selection and just say that God created the world like that. It becomes a little more difficult because why do we need God if we can't show design at every level? Well, there are certain things like the irreducibility of consciousness or the existence of life at all. Why is there anything? And so you can still make arguments for God, and those arguments in many ways are more primal than even natural selection, in which case you could have God using natural selection to create the world and still have a good, solid argument for the existence of God. So it's not as simple as if you believe in natural selection, you're an atheist versus theism. But when you do believe in a God, usually you would start to see some purpose everywhere, some grand purpose for everything. And philosophers working through that and thinking about that, noticing the natural hierarchies, they came up with this theory of scala naturae, and you find it in the Gita. And you find it in alchemy, and you find it in Shakespeare. Even the various humors in Shakespeare, the milk of human kindness I looked up yesterday because I used it and I thought it was from Shakespeare. I looked it up. It comes from Macbeth. And the queen is complaining that her husband is too weak to kill, to acquire power. And so she says he's too affected by the milk of human kindness, which means by compassion, to do what needs to be done. And it was based on the humor theory that, blood naturally separates into 4 humors. Some black stuff, which is bile, and then some clear stuff, plasma, if you let blood sit. And therefore, the various qualities of human beings are affected by the humors or the fluids in their body. If you have an excessive milk in your body as one of the humors, then you'll be a naturally compassionate person. Even that's based on some kind of a hierarchy, looking for within nature different hierarchies of qualities and who should exemplify what. So, if you believe in a deity, the normal route is that you start to see order everywhere you look. And it just becomes the best of all possible worlds. Because an all-good God would want the best of all possible worlds, and an all-powerful God could create the best of all possible worlds. And therefore, when you look at this world, you start to look at it as the best of all possible worlds, where we have enough freedom that we're not forced to look at God, but there's enough divine inspiration around. If you want it, you'll see it. And there's lessons to be learned at every step, and you have an inherent purpose, like Mark Twain said. The 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. There's a why that you were born. There's a why behind you, and it's not just artificial. It's not just through random genetic mutation. There's a why, and that why was ultimately given by your Creator. And religion is great because it answers some of these questions the same way a good template for a state government, a good template for a legal code, a good template for the Constitution. The French Constitution was built on ours. We sent Benjamin Franklin over there. And the French Constitution, a few decades later, was built on ours. Why reinvent the wheel? You got great ideas, just touch them up a little bit, put some flourishes on them, but you use them. Maybe you improve on them, but you're able to build up. Imagine modern medicine had to be recreated every generation. We would be in the Dark Ages. We're building on pre-existing knowledge, and then we add to it. And it is millions of lifetimes, billions of lifetimes of knowledge are then put together and crystallized. You can learn them and learn how to do brain surgery in a dozen years. Wild things like that. So, although religion gets a bad name for being an organization, and therefore for centralizing power, and therefore for increasing the possibility of exploitation and blind following and so on and so forth, that happens automatically every day in every group, on any level, formal or informal, designed or not. It naturally happens because there's a natural order to life. Whether you conceive of that order as arising out of survivability and natural selection or as being divinely inspired, there's no way to get around it. It's always going to be there. Communism still had a natural order. When it broke down, it still had a natural order. Democracy has a natural order. The best you can do is try to make sure that the order that you design, because you don't want to just be natural, because that's the law of the jungle, and that's might equals right. So when you start to put together civilization, which essentially is forced rules for everyone, and they're forced because you'll kill people if they don't follow them. If you don't follow the traffic laws, they'll stop you, and if they can't stop you, they'll kill you. You see it happen every few years. Someone's driving around crazy, and they take out their tires, but then the guy still drives around crazy, and then you shoot him. They're approaching the car with their guns drawn. He's locked in. He just kind of goes back and forth like that real fast, just in a little tiny space, and then they shoot him. Because the car is a deadly weapon. Then he falls on his horn. You hear the horn. It's not just in the movies. You can watch YouTube videos that are happening in real life. Order's always going to be there. So I think it's lame to fault religion for that and not fault every single other field of human endeavor and every single group organization that ever happens on any level between two or more individuals. And so grouping is there. Hierarchies are there. A natural order is there. And in fact, if you engineer it, you can do a better job. In fact, that's one of the great things religion does. It thinks through thorny philosophical issues and presents you with a map to life and answers questions you might spend hundreds and millions of lifetimes trying to figure out. And they give you answers. You can judge them. Are these good answers or not? And you can, you're like, walking amongst the stars. Because you're able to encounter brilliant ideas, inspired ideas, that somebody took the trouble to set out and codify and put together. And you get such a leg up in life, like with that template for state laws, like with the Constitution, like with the cookbook, or a lab manual, or a counselor, or a mentor, or a therapist, or a teacher, or parents who are the ultimate teacher. They literally teach you how to think, along with teaching you language, along with you mirroring them as you walk. You guys following all this? So don't hate groups. You want to hate religion for being organized religion? Hate every single group of two people ever. Because of its inherent potential for abuse. Every relationship between husband and wife, between parent and child, every single group, ever, anywhere. Otherwise, make sure it's not oppressive, and then take the benefit. Encounter great ideas. Walk amongst the stars. See further than you ever see on your own. Religions, by giving ultimate maps for life for all human beings and stuff like that, end up being short on details because ultimately life gets organized on an individual, unique level, like your fingerprints. What do you do? So religions will answer, who are you fundamentally, a child of God? What's the purpose of existence? To love. And the whole love thing makes a lot of sense. Imagine being a multi-billionaire and having no one love you. No one to come home to. What an awful existence that would be. Jeff Bezos being, the second richest man in the world, which is surprising. You don't only think of Jeff Bezos as being the richest man in the world, but Elon Musk, as bizarre a character as he is, has him lapped. I think he has twice the wealth of Bezos. I think Bezos is around 150 and Elon Musk is around $250 billion. I'm not exactly sure the numbers, but something like that. He has him almost lapped. Bezos, when Amazon bought Whole Foods? You guys know that? Amazon bought Whole Foods for $13 billion, $12 or $13 billion. Which is insane, right? It's like so much money, right? And then immediately, Amazon stock went up in value by $25 or $30 billion. So by spending the $12 or $13 billion, he increased the value of his company instantly, the next day, by 25 or 30 billion, and therefore paid for his investment times two. Doubled his investment in a day. And what a brilliant thing, Amazon being where you order everything, and now you order your food through Amazon. It's like, man, the guy is thinking so far ahead. So far ahead of the curve. But anyway, Jeff Bezos has a girlfriend. She's some beautiful model, way hotter than he deserves. For sure, she's in it for his money. He got on steroids. He's all yoked out now. For sure, he's on steroids. And for sure, she's in it for the money, you know? I think he might have been richer than Elon Musk, but he divorced his previous wife, and she got a lot of money, like half his wealth or something like that. So she's sitting on 100 billion or something like that, and so that just cut him down to size. I think that's actually how it went down. But anyway, he got the new and improved model, because that's what you do. And so, but there was this event where he and his wife were at his girlfriend were at some event, and this is what I'm doing with my free time. I'm looking up this kind of hot goss. I'm like reading the National Enquirer. But he was at some event, and Leonardo DiCaprio was there. Like the ultimate male sex symbol, Leonardo DiCaprio. And at least for her age group. And there was a photo, or a group of photos, of her meeting Leonardo DiCaprio. And she had these come hither eyes going on. And it looked like she was, ready to just leave Jeff Bezos instantly. Like he was on the, there's that hall pass idea. Super low class hall pass idea that, and that, if there's like 3 people, if you meet them and they want to sleep with you, then you get to cheat on your spouse and sleep with them and you get a hall pass permission. I don't know if it's an urban myth or if people actually have this idea. I don't really want to know. I just, one of those weird things you read about and you hope it's not true. And what kind of marriage is that? But, yeah, she's meeting Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's like Jeff Bezos there, he looks like a chump. And he could throttle Leonardo DiCaprio. He's on steroids, and I'm assuming Leonardo DiCaprio does not fight his way out of a paper bag. But so I think he could beat him in a fight, but somehow that didn't make a difference. And it was hilarious because you've got this second richest guy on the planet, and he's getting chumped in public by his old lady who's goo-goo gaga over Leonardo DiCaprio. And it's just how it looked optically. I mean, hopefully she's got more of a spine than that. And then Jeff Bezos posted on Twitter, like there was a sign, like Danger Cliff, and he was like, "Come over here, Leo." Like, run over that direction. Essentially, he wanted to kill him. Trying to make a joke out of it, because obviously it got to him. Maybe his people told him to do that because it would give him back his manhood. And then everybody criticized him for that, for being so spineless or weak or insecure in his own relationships. He had to engage in that kind of chimpanzee-like jockeying for dominance, like Trump, The point I'm making is, what use is it of all that money if you can't count on anybody, if nobody loves you? In the U.S., your bodyguards are people you pay a lot of money to. They're professional bodyguards. And their professionalism is why they'll put their neck on the line and die for you, because you pay them a lot of money and they're professionals. In most old world countries, you don't have professionals as your bodyguards. You have your family members as your bodyguards. And then they become professional bodyguards and they get training. But you don't trust anybody except your family. And so your brothers and your cousins and your uncles become your protection detail, because you know they won't sell you out to the highest bidder. What use is all that money if there's nobody to love? There's nobody who loves you. Nobody you can count on. Nobody's got your back. You got to pay for all your friends. What a horrible position to be in. That's an interesting argument that survivability is not the goal of life. That there's something which supersedes even surviving. Namely love. And in fact, we find that sometimes people sacrifice their lives for love. Usually it's something super lame like Romeo and Juliet. But sometimes people sacrifice for a higher purpose. Now usually an atheist would come in and they'd say, oh, but that's for the survivability of the species, so they sacrifice their life. That's also built into our DNA. But sometimes you sacrifice your life for a principle, for something bigger than yourself, for an ideal, for something you believe in, something intangible, something abstract. Now atheism has to really stretch to wrap their head around that one. They start to sound like a ghost in the machine as they try to say, well, the abstract principle will ultimately is identified with survivability in your mind in some sort of abstract sense, and therefore they have to start to jump through hoops, and it starts to become their ghost in the machine. And the more elegant, more logical Occam's razor explanation is that there is something about being a human being that transcends survivability, namely purpose and love. I just made a very sophisticated argument that you guys won't be able to appreciate if you were listening to the whole class. I'll say it again though. I made the point that if evolution's true, then theism becomes a little bit of a ghost in the machine, a little bit of an unnecessary appendage that you add to a philosophy, that God's not necessary for the creation of the world, but he still exists. I gave you some strategies for how consciousness is still irreducible, and there's other things you can point to why anything exists at all. And you can still make arguments for God's existence that are not dependent on saying that the world was designed personally by God and that natural selection could not have been employed by the deity. But I said now theism is operating a little bit on the back foot, and usually theism prefers to argue for design throughout the entire creation because we have the best of all possible worlds designed by an all-good, all-powerful deity. I just flipped that argument and I made the point that if love trumps survivability, and in fact it does, then there are higher principles even in survivability. And now the atheists are on the back foot trying to argue and jump through hoops with their own ghost in the machine, their own unnecessary appendage, trying to explain how sacrificing your life for a higher principle is somehow survivability, when it's not. And they might say for your species, but what if it's for a principle and not for a person? What if you're not jumping on a grenade to save your cohorts, but in fact you're sacrificing your life for an ideal? That starts to challenge survivability as being the ultimate basic feature of reality and demonstrate that human beings are capable of even going beyond that. And that's an argument in favor of purpose, which is what I want to talk about today. I've only got 7 minutes left. This was all an elaborate warm-up. As I started talking, I felt like, okay, I want to explore these themes with you guys. I was just, freewheeling it. But there was something I wanted to talk about. And that is that there's a verse in the Gita. Shreya Swadharma Viguna. Better one's own. Shreya Swadharma Viguna. Better one's own dharma poorly. Paro dharma suanushtitat. Then another's dharma perfectly. Swadharma nidhanam shreya. Suanushtitat. Better. Shreya means better. Shreyan swadharma viguna. Better one's own dharma poorly. Paro dharmat suanushtitat. Suanushtitat. Then another's dharma perfectly. Shreya swadharma nidhanam. Destruction in one's own dharma is better because paro dharma bhaya avaha. Another's dharma invites fear. This is an argument that we all have a dharma. Religion is great for telling you what your collective dharma is. You're an eternal soul. The purpose of life is to love God. Love is the ultimate purpose of existence. Religion is great for those general principles of collective dharma that all people have. But then you're left wondering, what am I supposed to do for money? What am I supposed to do in my day-to-day life? And that question is still vexing, because when you got a big group and it's telling everybody what to do on a global level, you're not going to be able to get what you should be doing on an individual level, because the very nature of a collective philosophy is it's not going to tell you details about what you should personally be doing. You got it? So I want to give you guys a little leg up on that. You should look for religion to tell you about big things like the Constitution, big ideas, beautiful, powerful ideas, the biggest questions of life. Then you want to apply that on the day-to-day in your own life. And some of that stuff, like being detached and equipoise and victory and defeat, gain and loss, happiness and distress, heat and cold, that stuff applies really well. Simultaneously, you should figure out what you are amazing at. What could you potentially do at a high level and be at the 1% of people in the world that can do it at that level? What are you phenomenal at? What do you have the potential for being phenomenal at? What comes naturally to you? What have you tended to do since you were a child? What if you go back and think about your childhood, will you realize, oh man, I've always been interested in this. It doesn't have to be something you like. It has to be something that you are almost compelled to do. And you're good at it. And it's natural. And you're gifted at it. And you have a suite of skills that actually support that endeavor. If you're a teacher, you have the ability to understand a subject matter in great detail, to communicate to others. You have good speaking skills. You enjoy studying. You enjoy a peaceful atmosphere. You enjoy watching other people grow. You're selfless. You're going to have a suite of skills and inclinations and natural qualities that support this profession. You love making money. You're good at it. You're clever. You see things in a different way than other people do. You can see far ahead. You're risk averse. You're risk friendly. You enjoy thrill-seeking behavior. Entrepreneur. Who are you at your core? What were you put on this earth to do? What's your Dharma? What comes natural to you? What do you have to do? What if you don't do you not feel whole? Like Anandini says she hates managing, but she's a liar. She loves managing. She loves controlling other people. That sounds so evil and awful, but why? There have to be people around who control others, because most people need to be controlled. And anytime you have a group, there have to be people at the top of that group telling others what to do, and it requires a particular skill set to do that, and not everybody has it. A lot of people will go insane if you put them in that role. They'll fall apart. They won't be able to function. The stress and the weight of responsibility will be too much for them, and they'll fall apart. But there are some people on earth who thrive in that environment. Those people should be managers. Those people should be given responsibility for controlling others. You should have checks and balances. They don't become totalitarian. They don't become despots. But it's a skill set. And she says she doesn't like doing it, but she's lying. She loves it. In fact, if she's not doing it, she'll go do it somewhere else. She'll join a young mothers club and start being in charge of all of them. Or she'll go to the library and be in charge of everything at the library. She'll just do whatever. She'll always be in that position where she's rising to the top. You're a counselor. Find what it is that you're better at than anybody else. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't run from it. Look back, you'll see your whole life you've been leaning in that direction. You'll see it's who you are. That's your Dharma. That was a purpose given you by Krishna, who created the world with purpose inherent within it. And the purpose of life is to discover what that inherent ability is, and then to use it to help others, to love Krishna, to make the world a better place. I'm moving fast now, because I got 30 seconds left. But that's the goal of life. is to figure out what it is I can do to best contribute to my own happiness, to the happiness of others. What can I do at a high level? What can I dedicate myself to? And I can, sail amongst the stars and do it at a high level and do something wonderful with it. And then take that and give that to Krishna. Do that for Krishna, along with the world, along with for yourself. And you'll feel whole, and you'll help others, and you'll excel, and you'll uplift the world, and ultimately you'll offer a very, very beautiful garland to Krishna of your abilities that were ultimately given by some higher cause to you. And then when you take those and you give them back to Krishna, that's the ultimate offering. I took what you gave me and I made something beautiful out of it. I'm a child. I need the pens and the paper from my parents, but they give it to me and I make them a beautiful card. They teach me how to write. They hold my hand, but I make them a beautiful card. That's the best offering. And to do that, you have to figure out, who am I? At my core, look back through your whole life. You'll see it. It's there. It's always been there. Stop running from it like a rebellious teenager. Settle into it. Accept who you are. And then put in the time to develop that to a very high level. Be ambitious to become amongst the best at what you do. And see that that was given as your dispensation by the Lord to excel. He gave you a suite of qualities and abilities. Simultaneously, they're your karma, and they represent the best offering you can possibly make to Krishna. In some ways, you built them out of your karma over many lifetimes. In other ways, Krishna created karma, so ultimately he's responsible for that position. And on a more esoteric level, you have a particular relationship with Krishna in that world, not in this world. And the same principle of discovering who you are deep down inside even helps you know who you are in the spiritual world, and what your eternal relationship with Krishna looks like. And our tradition mapped that out as well, like a brilliant government. You can love Krishna up as a child loves their older sibling or their parent. You can love Krishna down like a parent loves a child. You can love Krishna equal, like a friend, or the romantic attachment, which is as a lover. And those four relationships are the basic relationships with Krishna in Vrindavan. And that's also waiting to be discovered. And the way to get there is to go through what we just talked about, getting through your karma, getting through your gifts, getting through what you were put on this earth to do. When to offer that to Krishna, that opens up a world where you can start to smell and see and feel who you are in that world. Thank you, IGTV. You guys want to give me some feedback?